Welcome history enthusiasts and curious minds to the Top Prime Rankings channel. Today, we unravel the tale of Anschluss, a pivotal moment in history when Germany, under the command of Adolf Hitler, annexed Austria on the 12th of March, 1938. This audacious act, fueled by Hitler's expansionist ambitions, marked an important step in the Nazi Party's consolidation of power across Europe, met with surprisingly minimal international resistance. Today we delve into the events leading up to this significant historical event. To understand the Anschluss, we must first transport ourselves to the Pre-Anschluss era. The early 20th century was a time of dramatic shifts in the political and economic landscape of Europe. The end of World War I had left the continent in ruins. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, sought to establish a framework for peace, but it also sowed the seeds for future conflict. Germany, the perceived instigator of the war, was hit hardest. The treaty imposed severe financial reparations and territorial losses on the country, sparking widespread resentment among the German people. The economy was in shambles, and hyperinflation led to a severe currency crisis. The middle class was wiped out, and poverty was rampant. Austria, too, was dealing with its own set of challenges. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had disintegrated following the war, leaving a new Austrian republic to pick up the pieces. The economy was weak, and political instability was the order of the day. In the midst of this chaos, a charismatic figure emerged in Germany, a man named Adolf Hitler. Hitler, a native of Austria, had served in the German army during World War I. He joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazi Party, in 1919. By 1921, he was its leader. Hitler's rhetoric tapped into the frustrations and fears of the German people. He promised to restore Germany's dignity and power, blaming the Treaty of Versailles and the Jewish people for the country's woes. He also spoke of the need for a unified German-speaking people, which included Austria. By the early 30s, Hitler had consolidated his power in Germany. He had transformed the Weimar Republic into a one-party dictatorship, suppressing opposition and promoting Nazi ideology. Meanwhile, in Austria, there was a growing sentiment among some quarters for unification with Germany. With Hitler's rise, the stage was set for the Anschluss. Now let's investigate the path Hitler took to annex Austria. Adolf Hitler, the man infamous for his dictatorial rule over Germany, had a grand vision. A vision that involved expanding German influence across Europe, starting with Austria. A native Austrian himself, Hitler held a strong conviction that Austria should be united with Germany, a sentiment that was shared by many Austrians at the time. One of the key events that set the stage for annexation was Hitler's rise to power in 1933. He implemented policies that aimed at creating a unified German state, which included Austria. His vision was of a greater Germany, a racially pure state that held dominion over the entire continent. To achieve this, Hitler began by manipulating public sentiment. He used propaganda to stoke the flames of nationalism and racial supremacy. Through his speeches and rallies, he stirred up the collective pride of the German people and instilled in them a sense of superiority over other races. This was a powerful tool in his arsenal, and he used it to great effect. Hitler's skillful manipulation of public sentiment was only part of the equation. He also needed to maneuver politically to make the annexation possible. He began by pressuring the Austrian government using a combination of diplomatic and economic tactics. In 1934, he even attempted a coup in Austria, which failed, but further demonstrated his resolve to unite the two nations. But the final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Hitler signed the Berchtesgaden Agreement with Austrian Chancellor Kurt Schuschnigg in February of 1938. Under this agreement, Schuschnigg agreed to appoint several pro-Nazi ministers to his cabinet. This effectively gave Hitler control over Austria's political landscape and opened the door for annexation. Despite international disapproval, the Anschluss was now inevitable. March 12, 1938 marked a dark day in history, the Anschluss. This day was pivotal as it saw the German troops marching into Austria, unopposed and welcomed by a seemingly enthusiastic crowd. The Anschluss, or political union, between Germany and Austria, was the result of Adolf Hitler's expansionist ambitions, a plan to consolidate Nazi power across Europe. This was not a sudden invasion. It was the culmination of a series of events, a meticulously planned strategy that was set in motion by Hitler and his regime. Austria was not just another country for Hitler, it was his birthplace, a land he believed should be part of the greater German Reich. As German troops crossed the Austrian border, there was a lack of resistance. The Austrian government, led by Chancellor Kurt Schuschnigg, had resigned the day before, leaving the country leaderless and vulnerable. The Austrian people, swayed by propaganda and promises of prosperity, were largely supportive of the Anschluss, welcoming the German troops with cheering crowds and Nazi salutes. The changes in Austria were swift and significant. Within days, the country was integrated into Germany. Its flag, its anthem, and even its name disappeared. Austria was no longer a separate entity. It was now Ostmark, the eastern province of the German Reich. The Nazi regime began to implement their policies, including anti-Semitic laws, and thousands of Austrians, particularly Jews, were arrested and sent to concentration camps. The international response was muted. Despite the clear violation of the Treaty of Versailles, which had forbidden the union of Austria and Germany, the world largely stood by and watched. The Anschluss was a clear demonstration of the policy of appeasement pursued by Britain and France, who hoped to avoid another world war by not provoking Hitler. The Anschluss marked a significant step in Hitler's aggression and the consolidation of Nazi power in Europe. It was a stark reminder of how far Hitler was willing to go to fulfill his ambitions, and the world would soon realize the full extent of his plans. The world watched as Hitler annexed Austria, but what was their response? The international community's reaction to the Anschluss was, in a word, muted. Despite the blatant violation of the Treaty of Versailles, which explicitly prohibited the unification of Germany and Austria, the world powers chose a path of inaction. Britain and France, both scarred by the horrors of the Great War, were reluctant to engage in another potentially catastrophic conflict. This hesitation gave birth to what is known today as the policy of appeasement. Essentially, they decided to tolerate Hitler's aggression, hoping it would satisfy his expansionist ambitions and prevent a war. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously referred to this as peace for our time. However, this policy of appeasement did little to curb Hitler's ambitions. On the contrary, it emboldened him. The lack of international opposition to the Anschluss was seen by the Führer as a green light to pursue his plans for Lebensraum, or living space, for the German people. This would lead to further territorial grabs, notably the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia and ultimately the invasion of Poland, which marked the start of the Second World War. The League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations, proved largely ineffective in the face of such flagrant aggression. Its condemnation of the Anschluss was nothing more than a paper tiger, as it lacked the military might to enforce its resolutions. The League's failure to prevent the Anschluss highlighted its inherent weaknesses and hastened its demise. The Anschluss was not just a territorial conquest, it was a significant step in the consolidation of Nazi power in Europe. It marked the beginning of a dark chapter in human history, a chapter filled with unimaginable horrors and atrocities. It was a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked aggression and the catastrophic consequences of appeasement. In retrospect, the Anschluss was a clear warning of the horrors that were to come. The Anschluss, a significant event in history, was more than just an annexation. It was a calculated move by Adolf Hitler, a manifestation of his expansionist ambitions that changed the political landscape of Europe. We began our journey in the Pre-Anschluss era, a time of political turmoil and economic instability in Austria. This made the country ripe for annexation, an opportunity Hitler seized with both hands. We then traced the path to annexation, a route paved with strategic alliances, manipulative diplomacy, and blatant disregard for international law. The Anschluss itself, carried out on March 12, 1938, marked a significant step in Hitler's aggression. It was a consolidation of Nazi power, executed with little resistance from the international community, a fact that only emboldened Hitler in his future endeavours. In the aftermath of the Anschluss, we witnessed the ripple effects of this event on the world stage. The international response, or lack thereof, showcased the limitations of the League of Nations and set the stage for the widespread aggression that would eventually lead to the Second World War. Through this historical lens, we've seen how the Anschluss was not just a single event, but a series of calculated moves that had far-reaching consequences. It's a stark reminder of how individual decisions can shape the course of history. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history at the Top Prime Rankings channel. Until next time, stay curious.